Welcome to the Filmsteins, the double feature podcast. Join us as we unravel the interwoven experience of the continuous conversation of cinema. Take part in pairing movies with their cursed counterparts, movies that share DNA, or even pairing questionable duos by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/filmsteins. We offer tiers at the $1, $5, and $20 level, where the $5 tier will grant the ability to request films to further the discussion. So grab some popcorn, sit back, and get ready to join the 100-year conversation. This is the Filmsteins, where movies are more than just entertainment, they're an experience.
They're an experience.
All around you. And welcome back to another episode of the Filmsteins. Thank you guys for joining us today. Today I'm joined by my primitive friend, Lucy.
Hello, everyone.
Remember, we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with brand new episodes of the Filmsteins. Some recent episodes include Challengers, King Richard, Memories of Murder, Mother, Bong Joon-ho's other film, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, that's the new one. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon as well. Come request a movie, come subscribe for $1. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much.
Are you stressed and filled with anxiety like I am? Maybe in a bit of pain from that car accident you had a few years ago? Well, the sponsor of today's episode, Hempville CBD, has us covered. They have the highest quality products created by chemists and doctors. Hempville carries everything from CBD to THC dispensary grade without those despicable dispensary prices. Order your Delta 8, 9 edibles and vapes along with the THCA flower and get free shipping when you spend $50 or more at hempvillecbd.com. Check out the link in the description for more details.
But today we will be discussing one of the biggest movies of the year, David and Nathan Zellner's 2024 movie, Sasquatch Sunset. And I'll be the first to admit, no matter how much I was looking forward to this movie, it still is probably one of the biggest surprises of the year. Probably will be the biggest surprise. This movie is awesome. It's not great, not a great movie, but it is an awesome movie. It's very fun and surprisingly sad. I think there's a very interesting duality of story happening here, including the fragility of the nature of being a Sasquatch, while also working on the cylinder of humanity sort of discovering itself and all of its kind of uncomfortableness. But I know you're very hit or miss when it comes to the bizarre movies. You have to suffer through some of them because I make you. So I'm very curious how you fared during probably the weirdest movie we've covered this year. What do you think of Sasquatch Sunset?
I'll start out with saying that I'm pretty divided from the things that I didn't like to the things that I liked about it, like super extreme ends. This movie's kind of nasty and kind of raunchy in a way, with them farting and like throwing up and smelling themselves. And I could almost look past that until we had, the zooming in on private parts and the pooping and throwing poop and all those kinds of things, that it became almost too much. And I had pretty much given up on the movie like 35 minutes in. It seemed like nothing was happening besides this slice of life, them being, Sasquatches out in nature doing nasty things. But it wasn't until the alpha male, the dad, whoever he was, got killed, when I was like, oh shit, okay, now something's happening. And then it really picked up and had some elements that I really liked about it. So I don't know. I don't want to say I liked the movie, because out of 88-minute movie, I didn't like 35 minutes of it at all. Can I really say I liked it? I don't know. It's like, when you don't like the end of the movie, are you going to say you don't like the movie? No, not really, because you could still like the other parts of the movie, but just 35 minutes of a film is a lot not to like. But then it all of a sudden becomes this movie about loneliness and survival and even family, which is kind of cute, kind of nice. It has a really slow start, like I said, but I enjoyed the practical effects. I enjoyed the score a lot. And I surprisingly enjoyed the lack of dialogue. And the end is so fucking sad that it's not an awful movie, but it's not a great movie.
It's true this movie has a very slow setup, build up, and when the daddy Sasquatch gets eaten by a cougar, there's something really funny about it, but the film does kind of feel like it takes a 180, and it's so jarring that it, at least me, helps incentivize this like kind of microscopic view of the rest of the movie. Like, what the heck is this movie going for? What is this movie trying to say to me right now? Because it feels like Full House, Brady Bunch, family sitcom, procedural show until the daddy dies. And you're just like, what? And in my head, I've kind of pieced together this through line of the different beats the Sasquatches hit. And the major through line concept is the evolution of thought within humanity, and in particular, it's not necessarily through time, but through potentially a lifetime. And that especially rings true with me when there's this urge for our Sasquatches to try to connect. And we have the older child Sasquatch counting, sort of, at least trying to count, think about trying to count. And then we have this other Sasquatch who talks to himself, which is probably the coolest representation of thinking I've ever seen in a movie. If we could just combine those two younger Sasquatches, we might actually have a complete thought or something a little more familiar to humanity. And when they stumble across the road and like that camp, and there's this frustration and fear and intrigue these guys are going through, but it turns into violence. It just reminded me of people dealing with technology and then actually becoming violent with the technology. Like, how many times has your phone not worked or your computer been slow or something, and you start tapping the keyboard a little harder? It's just like, it's so visceral and primitive that it feels like this film is almost a statement of humility, of we're not too far removed from living like something so primitive as a Sasquatch or something else in the vein, if we were just removed from our technology. And my favorite part of all this is this desire to connect and reach out, because there's this duality, because at the end of the day we are messing with some Sasquatches here, and the big thing in the back of our minds is, are they going to run into humans? Right? And in retrospect, when the film's over, it's kind of silly to think that, because people don't run into Sasquatches. That's why they are the myth, right?
Right.
So it starts to create this loneliness within our Sasquatches. And I mean, it's deeply sad. It reminds me of humanity trying to reach out across the stars, and we only further build this narrative that we are alone. Because perhaps a lesser movie would have had the Sasquatches come across another set of Sasquatches.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. But besides them being lonely, there wasn't much else in the movie for me. And the scenes where she lost, daddy Sasquatch and maybe older brother or uncle, whoever that other Sasquatch is that drowned, those parts were really fucking sad, especially the drowning one. That was pretty visceral to watch. But besides this kind of loneliness that they're experiencing, I didn't get why we had to make a whole movie about this. Because I can talk to you all day about the practical effects and the lack of dialogue and how that was pretty cool in this movie. And I will mention some things that I really enjoyed. But it just seemed like this movie was way too long just for that.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of movie that challenges the viewer into asking why we need this movie. And it's so committed and so linear that it really begs the question of, what are you trying to say to me? What is this message?
Right, because if this movie was about something we knew existed, something that was confirmed that existed, maybe I could take it as a call to action sort of thing, or I don't know. But because they are these mystical creatures that are, at least here in this movie, very human-like, I'm not understanding the point.
Yeah, maybe there's this element of how humanity is the Sasquatch of the universe.
See, that's too too out there. That's too out there for me with this kind of movie. It just seems too far-fetched. And I say that because of all the just kind of grossness and raunchiness that happens here. Because how am I going to take that seriously when you have these elements that obviously people don't like watching on screen? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but you can say something really smart and then throw in there a poop joke, and all of a sudden, like, my idea of you just lessens a little bit. And I think that's a problem a lot of people had with this movie, that once these Sasquatches started throwing poop or peeing everywhere or whatever, they walked out of the movie theater. They weren't going to stand for that. I think that's a little extreme. Also, if you paid for it, that's
Yeah.
that seems like a waste. But I get it to some degree, because I also think that's something that's they're trying to say in the movie, like how you said in the beginning, this kind of evolution of thought, and that's part of it. We were like this years and years and years and years ago. We were probably flinging poop at people years and years and years and years ago. I don't know. Just seems like we were, based off of how just explosive our reactions can be today. So I get the necessity of including something like this in the movie, but then again, also on the back of that, it's like, you know, we're too classy for that now.
And here I was thinking that people saying there's too much poop and stuff was being overstated. Because in every scenario in the film, I do take the shitting and pissing as a reactionary kind of thing, where it's just displaying our crassness. How else is a primitive animal-like thing gonna display that? And the sex, you know, is this kind of sweet spot in between the best representation you probably could have of between animal and humanity. Because there's something really feral about it, but there's also something really passionate about it happening in the woods with all the other animals looking at you, which is hilarious.
Yeah. Maybe you just have to be a little bit more mature to overlook these kinds of things, and maybe I'm not there.
Maybe there's some sensitivity thing there, because some people can't just see that. It grosses them out, right? It's like how some people can't look at certain horror, gore, or
True.
graphic things. It just makes them feel strange and uncomfortable. It reminds me a little bit of Poor Things and the sex, where we don't really get nearly as much sex in this movie, but it's still kind of a central point that's repeated throughout, which makes sense because most species on the planet require some kind of sex for propagation. But we had this very human element coming out of the female rejecting the man, and maybe even going as far as requiring a little alone time. But it does feel like it's one of those fringe movies where if it doesn't land pretty quickly, you're going to kind of have a radical relationship with it in one way.
Yeah, and I agree, because the sex elements here were pretty funny to me, especially with the alpha being, you know, I guess he was high on the mushrooms, right? And then saw this cougar and was like, hey, you know what? I'm so horny right now. I'm gonna try to have sex with you. And it was just, I don't know, that element of it I found kind of funny. Nothing too smart about it. It's just, you horny, you have to do what you gotta do. Which there's something kind of primitive about that, which was funnier to me because it led to his death. So maybe for me, I was missing that kind of extra thing about the necessity for that. I don't know. Because my favorite part of this whole movie is when they discover the road. That was hilarious. Their whole reaction to the road, they're looking, they're like, oh, what is that? And then they look to the side and it's like, oh my God, there's more. And they're just like screaming and hooting and hollering. And they're like losing their shit. And it's awesome. The score behind that, everything behind that was awesome up until they start pooping on it. And I was even okay with them peeing on it because I thought it was like some kind of territory joke or marking like a new thing and now it's theirs something. I thought we were heading somewhere with that. But then the mom is like so pissed that she like defecates on it. And that's when it all of a sudden just lost it for me. It didn't stop becoming my favorite scene because everything before that was absolutely awesome. But then that happened, and maybe that's, again, like you said, that's just not my humor. Maybe that's where it stops for me at the pooping, and I'm like, oh, I can't. I can tolerate throwing up. I can tolerate the sex. But then once people start pooping, I'm like, I don't know about that. It's like too far.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And I think that scene went on too long. I thought the jumping around was too much, especially the super wide overhead shot where they were flaring about. I thought that was probably the most extreme part of that, where it's just like, all right, chill.
Oh no, I loved it.
We're done with this scene. I get it.
I loved it.
Because the pooping and peeing and whatever was that language of just how extreme their language was and their emotion was with stumbling across this thing, this paradigm shifting kind of thing. I will say about the daddy squatch getting eaten, at that moment I was like, oh man, this movie is about why we don't see Sasquatches, because they're stupid.
That's funny.
That's why there's so few of them, because they are putting themselves in danger, which I think is still true, because we see that again in a just as equally crazy, just accidental scenario way, which is awesome. Yeah, I guess I just saw the pooping and peeing as less pooping and peeing and more of an extreme reaction. I just saw right through it, I suppose. Because you see the exact same thing happen at the camp. I think one of them pees, but that's it. And then everything else just gets destroyed. And so that's the reaction. There's nothing to destroy on the road. They can jump around and whatever, but they're not destroying anything. It's not a visceral thing happening.
Because we also have this other scene where the mom is sniffing herself, which, again, I would put it in this camp of just grossness things. But then with that, almost like the sex one, she's teaching the son and the potential other son, whoever he is, the two boys, that this is what a woman smells like, or maybe this is what a pregnant woman smells like. Like, she's teaching them these things because they rely on scent way more than we do now. So my mind kind of rationalized that, like, okay, it's for something. This crudeness is for something here. But then there's others that I just couldn't, and that's what left me so divided with, do I like it or do I not like it?
So I will say, at face value, this film is probably for the Squatch specialists, especially because of the yelling, the howling, like they did.
The wooey?
Yeah. That's something you'll see a lot on Sasquatch hunting shows and stuff. And kind of mixing that with the other perspective of like a Sasquatch show, because in the shows it always feels like they're very close to stumbling across a Squatch. And here we see the Squatches very close to stumbling across humanity in a much more explicit way than what you'll see in the shows. Because in the shows you'll see prints or vague figures of a Squatch from far away or something like that, sounds. But here we see constructions, roads, tents, museum, lumbering. So I have to admit, I find quite a bit in this movie that I enjoy. Between the desperation, loneliness, search for humanity, the embryonic stage of like consciousness, and the literal kind of depiction and daily routine of a Squatch. There's a lot here that I like.
And that kind of makes sense because you like these kind of day in the life, slice of life movies, that there's some elements of that here. I know you're a fan of the Florida Project and even that Spike Lee movie, Do the Right Thing. That's kind of like a slice of life, day in the life movie. And I'm not there yet on those types of movies. Even with Sasquatches. They're almost boring to me.
Yeah, I think those kinds of films either need to really hit with their messaging or the content themselves. Like kids living in the ghetto of Orlando in the Florida Project. That needs to be something very specifically interesting to you. And the perspective of that movie is what really interests me, because it's almost this documentary take on following, those 2 or 3 kids.
Which there's something documentary like also here in this movie.
Yeah, totally. You almost expected a narrator to pop up at points.
Yeah. I did appreciate how this film realizes that the audience is smart.
Thank you.
And the audience can follow an 88-minute movie with no dialogue and just grunting and gestures and facial expressions. I don't know. I like that quite a lot. There's very few movies out there that have no dialogue, first of all, especially maybe this genre of movie. And then on top of that, you have these actors who are in makeup and all these bits and pieces of crap on their face to make them look the way they look. So they have a very limited range of facial expressions they can perform in these costumes. And not only are they limited, but they're also maybe not as recognizable as if it were a human being on the screen, that you can immediately recognize these facial expressions. And I loved it. Especially, and I know we keep bringing it up, but especially that scene with the male drowning, and just everyone's facial expressions in that scene is so crazy. And him just like staring at you as he's dying, and he's kind of realizing that he's dying and stuck, and the mom's like freaking out and trying to help him to the best of her ability, but she knows she can't move this shit, and she's pregnant and having contractions. And just the intensity of that scene paired along with everyone's facial expressions was crazy. And it's just one of those great examples of what no dialogue in a movie can do, but also can make a director or people working on this movie do. Like, get so creative with everything else, like the editing. Like, this scene was probably one of the few times where I could recognize the editing. Other times where I recognize editing are maybe like transitions, and that's more like crazy transitions like the Saw movies. But here, the editing was so like fast and just crazy that even I, who don't notice editing, could recognize that this was about to be a very intense moment where something bad is happening. And we have other things like their gestures, which were pretty funny, especially the gesture that they did for sex, where they just slammed their hands together, and just kind of how childish that is. But if you have an ounce of brain cells, you can determine what they're trying to say. Or even like you said, where that small child squash has an imaginary friend almost. And the use of that is just so creative. I also think there's a certain amount of love that goes into a movie when they use practical effects. And it again sparks that creativity and gives it a certain vibe in the movie. And I don't think we had any CG here, if I'm not mistaken. I think even the animals were real. Or maybe puppets. Not sure. The skunk looked like a puppet, but then that cougar looked real. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know about CG. I think it was at least 95% practical. That cougar at times felt like it may have been kind of superimposed.
Okay.
They got it somewhere else and they were able to mask it out of its original video and put it here. I kind of got that impression. I wasn't too sure though. And that point really just fleshes out the committed bit to this, in that there has to be more to what this movie may first appear to be offering. It's just too honest, and maybe even go as far as saying that it doesn't have much subtext other than its kind of metaphorical interpretation. So again, I can't fault anyone in being on the fence with this, like you. What do you think of that creepy baby?
I liked it. It was giving me Eraserhead baby vibes. And it was also giving me Mandrake vibes from Harry Potter. And again, that's where some of that like love of the practical effects comes in. And I don't know, it's just hilarious how she would like hold that baby, and sometimes she would like throw it to the other squash, and just it looked nasty. And then we have that scene where the baby is not breathing and she's trying to resuscitate it back to life, and that desperation there in that scene it's crazy. I thought that was a nice touch, and it also helped with the bit of humor it has in the movie. Instead of trying to incorporate a human baby and putting makeup and shit on that. So I enjoy that. And I thought, again, the makeup looked great. All the costuming looked great. I liked how matted their fur was and just how disgusting it looked. Because that's how it would look if they were out in nature like that, getting into all these shenanigans they were getting into.
What do you think of the end where the Squatches come up to the Sasquatch museum? We enter this meta space. What are they saying?
It was a very sad scene to watch because they're trying their hardest to communicate with what clearly is a squash to them. They're like, you are a fellow member here. Why are you not answering? You know the call. You know the 3, 4, whatever, however many hit call. You're not whooping. What is going on here? So it ties in with that loneliness of, and I can't help to just think about it from the perspective of the mom here, but that loneliness that she experiences losing her mate, losing a potential son or another potential mate, whatever that was, almost losing her newborn, and now she is not really losing anything here, but she's realizing that she's not going to gain anything here. And it's very sad, and I can't help to think about maybe it saying something about the environment and humans and just kind of how gross we are with nature.
Yeah, especially with the lumbering part, there seems to be some kind of environmental acknowledgement.
Right, when you have a giant red X on something, even though I guess that means X, chop it down, right?
Probably.
Yeah, but that kind of symbolism is also bad. You don't want to see red on anything. You don't want to see X's on anything. And it was just kind of melancholic for these squashes.
Absolutely. I kind of took it as this failure for us to communicate with our history.
Because we were in a museum?
Because we're in a museum. Because it felt like this movie was coming to a head at that point of this duality of Squatch and evolution of humanitarian thought. And it reminded me a little bit of the zone of interest and us, memorializing, idealizing, commercializing our history to the point where it's so far removed from any real experience, thus kind of cutting off our connection to communicate with anything to come before. And so it just tied in the sadness of being alone and also us being alone from everything to come before us, from ourselves.
I like that comparison to the zone of interest and that feeling you get at the end of it. I can see the similarities here, but maybe I have to get past the comparing it to the Holocaust versus mystical creatures. Although Hitler was a mystical creature for sure. He sounds like one at least.
Which in itself might be a problem. We shouldn't let the mythology drive these characters of yesterday, and we should humiliate them to the point where they don't feel extraordinary, Because it loses its connective tissue to us, to present day. All right, man. Well, thank you for sitting through that movie with me and talking about it here today.
You're welcome.
Do you have a budget guess?
My budget guess for this movie is $2 million.
There is no conclusive budget online, it appears. If I had to guess, it was probably around that mark. I can't imagine this movie having gathered that many funds.
Yeah.
And they had to work really hard with what they got. It's a great example of that, probably. Kind of like The Whale. Although Darren Aronofsky could have probably gotten many times more than $5 million. But if I had to guess, yeah, $2 million, between $1 and $2 million, $3 million max.
And Ari Aster was a part of this, right?
I think only to the point where it was produced by his production company.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, we know he knows how to spend.
He may have funded some of this too. He may have saw the vision.
Mm.
And yeah, he, like you said before, he knows how to spend the money. He knows how to stretch that dollar.
Yeah, he knows how to budget.
Apparently went on to make about $1 million. So maybe one of these passion projects that ended up losing money. Yeah, it had a very limited release, and then I think it had a wider limited release later.
Because I read people were walking out of the movie theater, but I wasn't sure how worldwide this release was.
Yeah, this was probably one of those movies that only went to your Regals and AMCs and your bigger theaters.
Okay.
Well, over on Letterboxd with 16,000 people, not very many people.
Is that the lowest I've heard?
I think Landscape with an Invisible Hand was lower.
Okay.
They weighed in at a 2.9. I think that's low, but I get it.
I'm giving it a 2. It just wasn't my type of movie. It just really wasn't. And even the things I liked about it weren't enough.
I think I'm giving it like a 2.5 out of 5. So it's in the pocket there of movies I like, but it's definitely going to be a movie I forget that I've seen.
Yeah, me too. And before I forget, while I was, looking into this movie, whatever, I saw a comment on YouTube on somebody's review video that said, Ari Aster, pass.
Damn.
I know. It was hilarious.
He hasn't been part of many things. I guess his 5 movies that he's been part of in some way, I've done it for that person.
It was just funny because I was like, no, that's not.
He's a mark of not necessarily a good movie, but of a movie that you really should kind of go out of your way to see in some way because of just his ability to seek out or direct, just at the very least, interesting productions.
At least passionate ones, too. I believe all his films I've seen, or even ones he's been a part of, have had some sort of just love gone into it. But that comment made me laugh. It made me think of you.
Yeah, if you put Ari Aster's name on anything, I'll see it. I'm the opposite. Yes. I didn't know he was part of this until the credits, maybe the opening credits. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I should comment. Ari Aster? Yes.
Well, man, thank you again for watching this movie with me. And thank you guys for listening to this episode of The Filmistines. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, we post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with brand new episodes of The Filmistines. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon at patreon.com/filmistines. Go rate us on Apple Podcasts. 5 stars only, please. Or 1 star, I don't really care.
5.
Come request a movie. Come right in. Come subscribe. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much. But until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Filmistines. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on our cinematic journey. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained new insights and perspectives on the world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, especially Patreon at patreon.com/filmistines. And follow us on social media for more film-related content. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any feedback, suggestions, movie recommendations, or book recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, keep watching, keep loving the magic of movies. This is The Filmistines, signing off.